The Ten Commandments are a list of religious rules revealed to Moses on Mount Sinai, as described in the biblical books of Exodus and Deuteronomy, allegedly written on 2 tablets by God Himself. The Ten Commandments include the following directives: You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not worship a carved image. You shall not take the name of God in vain. Keep the Sabbath day holy. Honor your father and mother. Do not slay. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not bear false witness against your neighbor. And do not covet your neighbor's belongings. Although not widely used in the Christian tradition until the 13th century, the Ten Commandments are now considered emblematic of the morality and relationship with God that its believers strive for. Despite their significance in religious tradition, however, the Ten Commandments are far from straightforward.
With so many conspiracy theories out there, it's hard to keep track of them all. Welcome to What We Know, where we try to uncover the histories and mysteries of the world by presenting all different theories out there, and the only narrative we push is this. Here's what we know, make up your own mind.
Jewish, Catholic, Protestant, Christian, Orthodox, Islamic, these and more traditions all address the Ten Commandments and assign a different meaning to Moses' list of laws based on their own interpretation. Beyond the variances and description, the Ten Commandments are also plagued by translation issues, interesting additions, different forms, and divergent uses. The common perception of what the Ten Commandments are, what they mean, derives from incomplete information that doesn't address the many facets of this complicated list of laws. There are actually two complete and different sets of the Ten Commandments in the Old Testament. While the interpretation of the Ten Commandments varies across religions, the Old Testament alone contains two complete and different sets of the Ten Commandments in a single book of the Bible. In Exodus 20, ratio 1:17, readers find the commonly known list of 10 principles, which is later closely repeated in Deuteronomy 5, ratio 6:21. A second list of principles, however, exists just a few chapters later in Exodus 34, ratio 11:26. While the laws in Exodus 20 represent the well-known Ten Commandments, the principles in Exodus 34 focus largely on the rituals of the time. God commands His followers to keep the feast of unleavened bread, to sacrifice the first fruits of their crops, and to follow many of the specific traditions of the day that vary significantly from the commands of Exodus 20. Many scholars consider the second list of principles to reflect more original, ritualistic laws. After the Exodus 34 verses, the phrase 10 words appears for the first time, and God commands Moses to write down the words as part of covenant God created with His people. While modern-day Christians generally consider the words of Exodus 20 to be the real commandments, the confusing language suggests that the 10 words are either the laws of Exodus 20 or the laws of Exodus 34, depending on the interpretation. The phrase 10 commandments does not actually appear in the Bible. Although God's list of rules are commonly referred to as the 10 Commandments, this name does not actually appear in the Bible. In fact, the original Hebrew label is 10 words, a phrase derived from the Greek term Decalogue. Over time, the language surrounding Moses' laws adjusted slightly to give us the commonly known 10 Commandments. In Deuteronomy, Moses declares that the 10 words were commanded, and Jesus later refers to these laws as the commandments in the New Testament. While calling them the 10 Commandments is a logical leap, the term itself does not appear in the Bible. All the traditions agree on the number 10. The way in which the commandments are counted differs across religions. Although commonly known as the 10 Commandments, the first mention of the rules in Exodus 20 doesn't assign them a number. They are referred to as the 10 words in Exodus 34. Though these rules differ from the original laws of Exodus 20, they are again referred to as the 10 words in Deuteronomy 5, where they generally match up with the Exodus 20 laws. As if all that wasn't confusing enough, the commandments are also not labeled by number in the Bible. Instead, the rules are listed together without separation to indicate which commandments go together. Therefore, the numbering is left to individual religions. While each faith agrees that there are 10 principles, Jews, Catholics, and Protestants all count them differently. Each religion uses the commandments readily in their teachings, but their lists look very different from one another. In Jewish tradition, the first two and last two commandments are combined. In Jewish tradition, the first two and last two commandments are combined. Therefore, the first Jewish commandment is, I am your God, and you shall not have any other gods before me. The last commandment is, you will not covet your neighbor's household, and you will not covet your neighbor's wife. In other traditions, these verses may be separated into two different rules, but the Jewish tradition combines them. In Christian Orthodox tradition, the final two commandments are one. While the Jewish tradition combines both the first two and the last two commandments, the Christian Orthodox tradition considers only the last two commandments to be one. Notably, however, this faith deems the statement that establishes the speaker as God as a preface to the commandments, rather than part of the rules themselves. This renders their first commandment as, you shall have no other gods before me, which differs slightly from the listed laws in the Jewish tradition. However, the Christian Orthodox traditions mimics the Jewish faith's combination of the last two commandments, ending their list with a joint directive to covet neither a neighbor's household nor their wife. In Catholic tradition, the second two commandments are one, differing again from both the Jewish tradition and the Christian Orthodox tradition. The Catholic faith believes that the second two commandments are one. Much like the Christian Orthodox tradition, Catholicism considers the first statement, I am your God, a preface to the rules that are to come. However, unlike the Christian Orthodox, Catholics then combine the second and third commandments to create their first rule, you shall have no other gods before me, and you shall not make a statue or image to worship. The Catholic tradition also separates the last two commandments into two rules. The ninth rule warns followers against coveting their neighbor's house, and the 10th and final commandment directs the faithful to not covet their neighbor's wife. Islam doesn't accept the authority of the 10 commandments because they believe the teaching has been tainted. Islam was created by Muhammad and other scholars as a reformation of both Judaism and Christianity. The scholars believed that these religions had been tainted and wanted their new tradition to return to an authentic monotheism they felt was missing from other faiths. In this quest, Islamic scholars examine the authenticity of each Christian teaching, including the 10 commandments. The Islamic religion believes that the Bible contains important information, but they do not accept its ultimate authority. Instead, they believe the Bible was corrupted over years of translation and human error. As such, Islam doesn't accept the authority of the 10 commandments. Muslims don't object to the directives outlined in the commandments, but they certainly don't see the rules as a founding element of their faith. In the Quran, Moses receives the 10 commandments but does not reveal what they say. Although Islam doesn't accept the authority of the 10 commandments, the rules are still mentioned in the Quran. In one reference, the Quran describes Moses receiving the tablets that contain the 10 commandments but doesn't describe what the tablets say. Another reference speaks of the covenant with the children of Israel and loosely alludes the overreaching ideas of the commandments, though the individual rules are not listed. The Quran doesn't care what was written on the tablets because it outlines other rules for acceptable behavior. Although there are parallels to the 10 commandments, the Quran never mentions the original 10 words by the name while outlining the founding tenets of Islam. The Protestant version of the commandments from the King James Bible is said to be the most familiar to Americans. Despite the many formats of the 10 commandments, the Protestant Eastern Orthodox version is the most widely recognized. This version uses the Exodus 20 commandments from the King James Bible. These commandments are said to be the most familiar to Americans, so they are most likely to be spread in public locations throughout the country. Versions of the 10 commandments hung in schools and government buildings often align most closely with this Protestant interpretation. The Christian Golden Rule is not one of the commandments. The Golden Rule states, do unto others as you would have them do to you. Within Christianity, the Golden Rule encapsulates the way in which God expects his followers to live. Despite its significance and common use, the Golden Rule is not one of the 10 commandments, nor is it referred to as the Golden Rule anywhere in the Bible. While the 10 commandments were given to Moses in the Old Testament, what is now considered the Golden Rule originates in a New Testament verse. In Matthew 7:12, Jesus Christ says, therefore, whether you want men to do to you, do also do to them. For this is the law and the prophets. Jesus later repeats this sentiment when he describes what he considers to be the two great commandments. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with your soul and with all your mind, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. In Matthew 22, ratio 37 to 40. While speaking of the Old Testament commandments, Jesus says, "On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets," drawing a clear comparison between the golden rule and the previously revealed commandments. Even though Jesus equates the golden rule with the commandments, the new directive was a later addition to Christian law. It captures the way God wants his followers to live, but is not considered one of the 10 commandments. The commandment, "Thou shalt not covet," is more accurately translated as "do not take." Through years of research, Dr. Joel M. Hoffman, a biblical scholar and linguist, found that some of the original translations of the 10 commandments are inaccurate. One such example is the commandment, "Thou shalt not covet." By this translation, the commandment applies more to how someone feels than what they actually do. Therefore, even desiring the possessions of someone else is a sin, whether you act on your desire or not. By examining the Hebrew verb used in this commandment and comparing it to other uses in the Bible, Dr. Hoffman asserts that the directive is more accurately translated as "do not take." Therefore, it refers to actions alone, rather than a general state of mind. Using this commandment as an example, Dr. Hoffman claims that faulty translations have led to inaccurate teachings that focus on a person's emotional state rather than their actions. The commandment regarding slaying is likely mistranslated. In addition, "Thou shalt not covet." Dr. Hoffman asserts that the commandment regarding slaying is also mistranslated. The most common translations fail to capture the true intent of this command. Hoffman claims that the original Hebrew doesn't prohibit all kinds of slaying. Therefore, "do not kill" can't be the right translation, especially since the act is supported in certain cases in other biblical verses. "Do not murder," however, is too strict of a definition. The translated commandment also envelops manslaughter and other unlawful forms of slaying. While Hoffman doesn't offer another translation, he strongly believes that the current forms misrepresent the original intent of this commandment. Heated debates question whether the 10 Commandments are a religious text or a moral code. Although 10 Commandments originated in religion, certain scholars argue that usefulness of these laws extends their religious applications. The first 4 to 5 commandments are purely theological. They outline the relationship between God and his followers, declaring that true believers must put God above all others, refrain from worshipping idols, refrain from taking the Lord's name in vain, and keep the Sabbath day holy. The remaining directives, however, outline ethical rules that could apply to all people, religious or not. Due to the generality of some commandments, scholars argue that they are not strictly religious. Instead, they represent a universally applicable moral code that makes up the foundation of all of society. Interpreted as an ancient law instead of religious text, the commandments act as a piece of history still applicable today, rather than an important theological principle. While some scholars support this interpretation, others question the ability to remove God from the equation, especially considering the first 4 God-centric commandments. The separation of church and state blurs when it comes to the 10 Commandments, because many people believe the 10 Commandments represent a set of norms that all people can live by. The Hang 10 movement of the late 1990s proposed that the commandments be hung in schools in the aftermath of hostility among students. Proponents of the Hang 10 law argued that bringing religion back into school was the only way to address moral issues occurring in the education system. Opponents, on the other hand, argued that posting the 10 Commandments flouted the constitutional separation of church and state by supporting the principle of one religion, therefore indoctrinating the students. These debates are still ongoing. One side believes the 10 Commandments are the cure for the moral decay that plagues today's youth. The other side believes that supporting a specific religious text in public buildings is unconstitutional. Some believe the 10 Commandments are immoral by today's standards. Although the 10 Commandments are widely seen as the ultimate moral code, especially among the religious, their ancient origins are not entirely applicable today. These laws were written in a vastly different time, meaning they don't address some of the primary concerns of today. Beyond their limited scope, certain people believe the 10 Commandments are not only irrelevant in the modern age, but also immoral. The thinking goes that some commandments support thinking that, while not problematic in ancient Israel, is problematic today. For example, punishing descendants for the misdeeds of their ancestors, supporting enslavement, and considering a wife to be the property of her husband are all considered unethical in modern society. Literal translations of the Ten Commandments seemingly support immoral behavior. As such, some people argue that the Ten Commandments encourage antiquated ideas and fail to answer the ethical questions of today, which chips away at their usefulness.
If you enjoy this video and want to see more like it, please consider subscribing to us and hitting the like button. Feel free to write a comment below and suggest which theory you want to see next. If you'd like to further support this channel, please consider joining. Our membership link will be found in the description box below. We appreciate your support, and as always, thanks for watching.